Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience and getting our little tech issues sorted out. I'm Sam Peck. I'm the Executive Director of Family Councils of Ontario, and it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's session. I know this is something that is near and dear to many of us in that moving from institutional to emotional-based care. It's something that has become more of a discussion during the pandemic, so I'm excited for you all to be here today. Before we get started, we want to do a land acknowledgement. Now, these are essential in moving forward on a path to reconciliation, and it's to help us recognize and remember that we can and must do more to learn about the rich history of the land so we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, friends, partners, and caretakers. FCO was founded in Toronto on land that is the traditional territory of nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is still home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I'm coming to you today from Hamilton, which is located on territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. FCO is a remote team, and we encourage our team members, service users, and partners to reflect on colonialism's enduring legacy and to meaningfully engage in reconciliation. So you can visit whose.land or just Google whose land to learn more about the territory you're situated on. And it'll help you to learn more so that non-Indigenous organizations and individuals can work better towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, as it's a long-term journey. It's going to be specific to each individual and is constantly evolving for our organization. You can learn more about FCO at fco.ngo. We're here to help councils and staff members get up and running, manage any issues that arise, tech or otherwise, during your family council work. And we also play a role in research, supporting as collaborators, and elevating issues, concerns, and questions to sector and government levels. If you'd like to make a show of appreciation for our work, you can become a friend of FCO. There's the link to that on our website, and that's our monthly giving program. For as little as $5 all the way up to whatever feels meaningful to you, you can help us build funds to do some new and creative work. So I encourage you to check us out online, fco.ngo, look into becoming a friend of FCO. But for now, sit back, enjoy the afternoon session, and I'll pass it over to the presentation team. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to all again, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kathy Wright, and I'm the chair of the CARP Ottawa Advocacy Working Group on Long-Term Care. So just a few quick words on what we do. For the last few years, CARP Ottawa has been working with several of the other chapters and like-minded organizations in Ontario to bring about a culture change in the way care is delivered in Ontario's long-term care homes, from a task-based to an emotion-based model of care. And this kind of fundamental change is actually happening even in Ontario right now, albeit slowly, thanks to COVID, of course. We have lots of things to be thankful for COVID for, don't we? There are a growing number of long-term care homes that have implemented or in the process of implementing an emotion-based model of care, mostly the butterfly model here in our province. These homes have experienced better outcomes, both pre and during COVID, including fewer deaths, fewer cases, and enhanced quality of life for residents, staff, and families. So our goal is to increase the awareness of these homes in the hopes that this will convince the general public and the powers that be that it's the right way to go. This is our fourth Lunch and Learn webinar on the subject, and we are delighted to be co-hosting with Family Councils Ontario. FCO has done such an amazing job working with all the family councils, and we believe family councils are an integral element of our long-term care home system. And for more information on our webinars, you can visit www.changeltcnow.ca. And I'm now pleased to introduce our two speakers to you. Gerry is the president of G. Kupferschmidt Consulting Services Limited, consulting firm where he offers toxicological services to industry, government, legal counsel, insurance companies, and private citizens. He has reduced his clientele with his firm in order to devote most of his time as an essential caregiver for his wife, who resides in Sheridan Villa long-term care home in Mississauga, and to advocate for those suffering from dementia in long-term care homes. Over the course of his career, Gerry has been involved with various charitable efforts for a variety of institutions, including his church as director on the board of the Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital Foundation and the Alzheimer's Society of Brant, Haldeman, Norfolk, Hamilton, and Halton. Many of the education courses and training at the Alzheimer's Society have helped him to understand the disease and the methods used to assist and look after those living with dementia. Gerry is also a strong advocate for emotion-based care, especially the butterfly model, and the impact it can have on the well-being of those living in long-term care homes. He's also a strong proponent of legislative changes to promote transformative culture change in long-term care homes. Gerry has also contributed to our work at CARP in many ways. He did an informative and touching video for us from a caregiver's perspective, which you can now find on our website in the resources section. So thank you, Gerry, for all you have done and continue to do for us. And now, Mary Connell. So Mary, in 2017, Mary implemented the first butterfly model of care in Ontario at Malton Village Long-Term Care Home in Peel Region. My numbers may be out of date a bit, but the last I have is that 15 long-term care homes in Ontario and counting have either implemented or in the process of implementing the butterfly model. So thank you for being our pioneer, Mary. Mary also, for the last 5 years, has been had roles included being a dementia care advisor and dementia care advisor for the butterfly model in the region of Peel, a trainer for the butterfly model for Meaningful Care Matters. Mary recently retired from the region of Peel after 17 years. But Mary has many other talents, as she recently released a wonderful photo exhibit called Life is Beautiful, Memoirs of People Living with Dementia. This exhibit describes beautifully what emotion-based care is really all about. I would highly recommend it. It will definitely warm the cockles of your heart. This can be found at the Peel Art Gallery, Museum and Archives website. Most thankfully, Mary has not really retired. Quite frankly, we simply can't let her, period. She now describes herself as a dementia care advisor, a person-centered care advocate, a champion for seniors, a wife, a mom, and a dog lover. We are so fortunate to have both Mary and Gerry with us today. We can't thank them enough, and I will now hand the mic over to them.
Okay, I believe that I'm going to go first. Are you getting feedback from me?
A little bit, but no, keep on going.
Not much? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a couple of slides. Oh, it is getting feedback. Okay, I'm just going to turn it down a bit, Gerry. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, hopefully that works. Okay. So I think, Gerry, I'm going to have to call you back when you do yours. I don't think you're going to be able to hear me because it's giving too much feedback.
Okay.
Is that okay?
I'll move the phone away. Does that help?
A bit. Okay. So thank you very much for having me here today to talk about this. If you've heard me speak before, you know this is my favorite topic, something I love to talk about. I want to wish everybody a happy Alzheimer's month. And if you're Scottish, of course, today is Robbie Burns Day. Now, my father, who had Alzheimer's for many, many years, was a great old Scotsman, and today would have been an important day for him. And Coincidentally, this was the day that he entered into long-term care 5 years ago. So I was asked to describe how we got this model going and what kind of resources we needed. And I know that when you come from an institutional model of care and you go into a butterfly home, and I know this because I did close to 200 visits in a variety of Peel homes, people look at it and they can't quite get their head around how you would have done it. Where did you get the money? How did you get permission to do this? How did you work with the ministry? There's lots and lots and lots of questions. So like this slide says, there's the concept of person-centered care, then a miracle happens, and then you have a butterfly home. So it really actually isn't a miracle, although to some people it might appear to be that. It's a lot simpler, and I'll describe it. So what do you do if a miracle does not happen? And, you know, quite frankly, I think the province talking about emotion-centered care and wanting to put elements of that discussion into the Act actually is a miracle, because we've been working at this for a very long time. So more to come on that in the spring. So what do you do if a miracle doesn't actually happen and you do have to implement person-centered care? And I want you to know, when I'm telling you this, I'm not trying to be funny or flippant. It is very, very simple, but it can be missed. People are the most important part of change. And within an organization, if you don't have a leader that is invested in the change and is visible, your change won't happen. 99.9% of all change initiatives fail because they don't have committed leadership. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So what everybody needs is an evangelist within that home who, and at every level, so the administrator, that's the most important evangelist to have, but you need them throughout the management level, supervisory level, and definitely among staff. And when I mean an evangelist, sometimes you come across leaders that will say, yes, I really, really want it, and they see it as a metrics or an outcome measure. So in 2022, I'm going to implement the butterfly model, and I can check that off my list. So that's not an evangelist. An evangelist is somebody who is very, very committed to the well-being of those with dementia. And I'm sure we all are, but at an activist type level, because we're not at a place within our health system that this is just a part of everyday practice. So you do come off as being a little bit extreme to your colleagues in that when you talk to them about what you want to change. So you definitely do need an evangelist. You need a committed management team. So everybody is on the same page, because staff will very quickly figure out which member of your management team is not committed to this, and who they can maybe, maybe manipulate and change their thinking a bit to get them to go back to the old way. You need early adopters. So you need early adopters at every level. You need the administrator who's keen to get going, who's the evangelist, but also, and this is what I found, when I go into a home that's going to become a butterfly home, I spend quite a bit of time in there helping staff and spending time with the people who live there. But one of the things I'm doing is looking to see how people engage. And these people who are early adopters will inevitably come up to me during the visit and talk to me about how much they want change to happen in long-term care. These are the people that I connect with early and then get them involved in the change. And they can be found in every single home, and it doesn't have to be care staff. Very often it's not. Sometimes it's the housekeeper or the dietary staff. The home I'm in right now, now that I'm working with Jarlette, I'm helping out in a home in Muskoka. It's actually the supervisor for facilities who is absolutely fantastic. So you'll never know where you're going to find those early adopters, but you need them. You have to have families that want change. And you might say to yourself, well, isn't that everybody? But it actually isn't. This is a very, can be a very traumatic time in a family's life when they have a family member in there and they just want their loved one to be safe and secure. And so if they get them to a place where they appear like they're calm and everything's okay, families can become very worried that when the butterfly model starts, that you're going to go in there and shake things up a little bit, and it might disturb their loved ones. I mean, eventually those people see that the butterfly model works for them, but you need to have some leaders within the family group. And I would say almost, and Gerry will talk about this because that's a role he plays, families keep the leadership team and the team members accountable. They ensure sustainability by asking, why aren't we doing this anymore? Why don't we have more of this than that? So family is absolutely critical at every single stage, from planning to implementation to sustainability. You also need community partners that can help you out. So this could be the Alzheimer's Society or CARP. It could also be Advantage or the Ontario Long-Term Care Association, the Alzheimer's Society, as I said. It can be volunteers. It can be school children who live in the area. You need people within your community that are committed to change. Now, this to me are the 5 most important things. This probably wasn't what you were thinking I was going to say because I saw some of the questions, so I'll go to that. So what else do you need? So these are the things that people think about and think they need. I think these things are important. Of course, you need them, but they're less important than the people part. So you need a project manager with vision and commitment. People can't do this off the side of their desk. So they can't manage an entire home and then put together the butterfly model. It's just, it has too many working parts, and it's quite labor intensive. So you need a dedicated staff person that is just doing this. You need some kind of a model or methodology to follow. Obviously, there are things you can do that make your home more person-centered. That will help. But if you actually want to change the culture, there's a couple of different models or methodologies out there that will help you follow best practice and the things that are common among those models. You need very realistic timelines. So like the administrator that I said is going to check it off in their book. Okay, in 2022, I implemented the butterfly model. That might not be realistic for some homes. And at Malton Village, I would say, even though the butterfly model is implemented over 12 months, it probably took me 18 months to get it into a good place. And then Sheridan Villa took less time than that. I don't know whether we were just better at it or we had staff that were aware that it was coming. You also need resources. And this is the question people ask all the time. You need staffs, you need people, you need money, and you need time. Money is always the big question. And with all the butterfly homes in the province right now, there's varying degrees being spent on these butterfly homes. So there's lots of ways, if you don't have money, to implement this and make it effective. I'm giving you a really high level overview right now. So if people want to know more about that, you have to connect with me personally, unless I get the opportunity to answer it in some of the questions. Being part of a community of practice. So you cannot implement this in isolation. You need to work with other homes that are going through the same challenges and support each other, give each other ideas, because it can be very lonely to do this type of work. So you need other people to support you and help you get there. And again, you absolutely need family representation at each and every step. This is something that's not really historical in long-term care. I come from public health. It wasn't historical there, or even in the hospital when I worked there. But families must be a part of this process from the very beginning. Who knows these individuals better than them? No one, right? So you absolutely need families. So I know these are the things that people focus on when they think of implementing a model. But again, it's actually the first thing. The most important thing to implementation is an evangelist, somebody who's like totally in 100% and will move to that no matter what. I used to say to people, for my dad, I would walk barefoot across broken glass. That's the kind of evangelist that you need to implement this. And the other question that I think as humans we need to ask ourselves, so there's my lovely little dad on Robbie Burns Day. Every single time I made any decision or had to make a choice or connected with different partners or people within the region, I had to ask myself, would what I'm doing right now be good enough for my dad? And I think that's what people need to ask themselves. If my mom was in there, if my sister, if my grandmother, or my grandfather, would I be okay with this? So as human beings looking after our fellow human being, this is the big question, because I think historically we've implemented things that would be intolerable for us if it was our own family member. And very often people feel defeated and feel because of the province, et cetera, and regulations, these things are not doable. Well, we were able to prove that they were doable. But I ask you to ask that of yourself. Look through everything you do with that lens. Would this be okay? And that's my brother, just as an aside. So that's my presentation. That's the quick and dirty drive-through version. You can see my contact email there for Jarlette. And you know, feel free to email me and ask me if you have more involved questions, but certainly ask me today. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to move it over to Gerry again. Let's see, sorry.
Hello.
There you go, Gerry, you're on.
Okay. I apologize for this technical glitch that I have. Obviously, my computer's got COVID. I should have brought my grandson along to help me with this, but in any event, we're here now, and so I'm able to proceed. Now that you've heard from Mary and how we move from the institutional model of care to person-centered care, we need to work toward making all elder care in all its forms in a deinstitutionalized fashion. What I'm about to speak about is solely my opinion and based upon my reading knowledge and my experience with dementia as a caregiver for someone I love dearly. My involvement with institutionalized care has been restricted to hospital care only. Although they do a fabulous job in clinical care, their expertise in person-centered care, especially for mental health issues, is really limited. I would say it's non-existent. In my general reading and discussion with others, it seems that many of my observations about hospital care apply to long-term care homes using the institutional model as well. Anyone wanting to familiarize themselves with the various person-centered care paradigms should read a book entitled Growing Ever Older, and it's authored by Moira Welsh of the Toronto Star. I'm sure she won't mind the plug here. It's easy to read and full of information to help you make decisions about the type of care you wish to have for your loved one. Before I get too far into my presentation, I want to introduce you to Laura, proudly my wife of 55 years, who has dementia. She's been living at Sheridan Villa in Mississauga now for 23 months. And prior to that, Laura was in the local hospital for 4 months. It was a very difficult process and decision for me to have Laura admitted to this home, but I can now say that I am very happy I chose Sheridan Villa. It's an exceptional facility delivering person-centered care in the form of the butterfly model of care. Today, I'm going to try and speak briefly about how we can ensure that standards and procedures of a specific model are maintained, once established, even enhanced over time. There are always new and innovative things that can be done to make the long-term care experience rewarding for all. We want to make sure that the long-term care home that has transitioned keeps its person-centered care protocols as robust as possible over its lifetime, as they were the day they were implemented. We do not want any slippage in care, and we know there are lots of reasons why there can be slippage. Each person-centered care model has a set of standards that establish emotion-based procedures for that model. Training for each model should include all administrators, every staff member down the line, to ensure a consistent approach in delivering that model and a complete organizational understanding of the paradigm. Excuse me. This creates a cohesiveness in the implementation and resourcing of the model in question. Over the course of my exposure to person-centered care, there were circumstances where not all staff in the hierarchy were person-centered trained. When this happened, it was absolutely clear that the implementation was disjointed and not fully appreciated. Often institutional practices would begin to creep into the model. There was a clear improvement once training was enhanced, of course, or completed. After training and implementation, there are regular audits by a parent agency to ensure that specified procedures are followed. However, these audits reflect performance in a brief window of time. Such an audit is only reflective of performance when the audit occurs, but it's not representative of the ongoing day-to-day operations post-audit, and is most likely incapable of detecting subtle slippage in the care process. To ensure that procedures and practices do not suffer slippage, something else is needed to maintain a certain level of proficiency to allow for sustainability and accountability. The former provides an ability to maintain a prescribed level of quality on a continuous basis, whereas the latter represents quantification of performance, which is graded against an accepted reference standard prepared by the parent agency. In my opinion, the most important group to ensure sustainability and accountability is the informed caregiver, or the essential caregiver group. They know their loved one best and can more effectively evaluate needs and try to meet those needs by what is observed in the day-to-day operations at a given facility. And they do this by assessing those needs in light of the specific model of care. Currently, there are all kinds of reasons for slippage from the standard, COVID-19 being one of the main reasons. Although it must be recognized, there are unrelated factors to COVID which can seriously hamper good care as well. In many instances, the COVID experience has helped to identify weaknesses in our respective systems of care. Lots of lessons have been learned. For example, during an outbreak or an investigation, residents are subject to droplet and contact precautions, which usually means isolation in their rooms. This is an unavoidable practice given the nature of the virus and its transmissibility. But nonetheless, this approach can quickly erode the overall protocol associated with a given model of care when the outbreak is over. That requires continued vigilance. We must be continually on top of the issues that are related to this. COVID has caused serious staffing shortages, which is often remedied by modifying schedules, using redeployed staff from other homes, recruiting new staff, offering staff the opportunity to work longer hours, or by using agency staff. With staffing shortages, it is clear that many new staff are not trained in the model of care and very likely come from institutional model facilities simply because of demand. When this happens, it is extremely obvious to those of us who are familiar with the tenets of a particular model of care. So what happens? Emotion-based care becomes secondary to the traditional methods. In relation to staffing, another issue must be considered, namely unions. Unions are not always the greatest ally for person-centered care. Union requirements are not necessarily person-centered care needs and can supersede the needs of the given model of care. Issues can arise involving walking, wheelchair protocols, and physiotherapy. Because the institutional model has a tendency to frequently use medication for behaviors, the spin-off most often is lessened mobility. Trying to reverse this is frequently difficult and requires a concerted effort by staff, a physiotherapist, and a family member to assist in walking therapy. The last thing one wants to hear is the resigned attitude from a senior healthcare official suggesting that the brain can no longer communicate with the muscles because of dementia. What is often ignored or forgotten is the fear associated with falling, not the ability to walk. Making such a statement without an attempt to facilitate walking is especially unfair when the subject in question still has a lot of strength in the arms and legs and quite regularly trying to exit the bed or a wheelchair. Although all the physiotherapy in the world will not facilitate walking if the fear of falling is not taken care of first. Such a position requires pushback from a family member until we are proven wrong. We need new ways to address this issue, either by using different equipment and/or frequent sessions with a physiotherapist empathetic to such fears. In my opinion, far too many residents are prematurely relegated to the wheelchair in their dementia journey. The inability to walk often starts in the hospital before a loved one even reaches a long-term care home. Some residents do not like noise or family chaos simply because that is their nature. In my opinion, dementia exacerbates such behavior. Some residents in their pre-dementia days were also very safety conscious, especially about children, and may perceive such activities, the noise and chaos, as a safety issue. I know my wife does. She's very sensitive to those kinds of things. Recognition of this characteristic requires the sensitivity of the staff to make adjustments accordingly. The simple repositioning of a resident or residents can alleviate such behaviors. No other intervention should be required, least of all medications. Most facilities have some form of charting for resident behaviors. Such charts contain observations about sleeping, wakefulness, wandering, exit seeking, verbal responsiveness, physical responsiveness, hallucinations, screaming and yelling, resistiveness. Whenever a negative characteristic is ascribed to a given resident, staff often need to be reminded that every behavior must be measured against the stimulus used, who created the stimulus, familiarity of the staff member with the resident, and under what circumstance the stimulus was created, and any attempts at modifying the stimulus. Recording the response only is totally insufficient, simply because major care decisions are rendered on the basis of the data contained therein. A more comprehensive data gathering system would lead to better care decisions. Again, that's where the caregiver becomes important. Often personal care is a major factor which will generate angry physical responses. In my opinion, this is a natural response and has little to do with dementia. It would occur, dementia or not. So much of the response relates to predisposition, the staff involved, the manner in which the resident is addressed, and the environment in which the care is conducted. Showering, bathing may require special procedures and modifications to the environment, such things as bathing with a doll, using soothing music, time of day, changing the bathroom environment to make it look less institutional, using staff for personal care who have a personal relationship with the resident can go a long way. Once again, we need personal care procedures and facilities that are specific to the needs of the resident, not the long-term care home. Also, when it comes to hallucinations, we need to be careful what significance is ascribed to them. Some practitioners try to eliminate hallucinations entirely. However, there are circumstances where hallucinations can be beneficial. As long as they are nonviolent, do not jeopardize safety or create sensitivity for others, hallucinations can be good. I continue to maintain that hallucinations can pass the time for the resident, since they often speak to family members, friends, or acquaintances as if they were present. We need to remove such labels and find neutral ways to provide care. One size does not fit all. We should avoid drugs as much as possible. Doing this can be a very difficult balancing act. There's a tension between the use of drugs and the available behavioral support systems. It's my philosophy that less drugs should be used, not only because they tend to sedate residents, but they also induce untoward behaviors. I've observed significant changes in Laura's behavior, along with increased happiness and peace by working with the geriatric psychiatrist at Sheridan Villa. Laura is happier now, at peace, more so than she has been for a long time. This has been noted and recorded by many staff members. It's far too easy to medicate an uncooperative individual when distraction, avoidance, deflection, redirection could diffuse a given situation entirely. I've observed this dichotomy in action on numerous occasions and found the latter to be far more effective and more respectful of the resident. The former is simply more expedient and should not form the basis for person-centered care. Now, for the caregiver to be effective as an auditor, there are a few things they need to do to remain credible and effective. Number one, be informed about the disease. We need to know the parameters of the disease and the needs of our loved one, and then translate that knowledge into how the person-centered care model is capable of coping with those needs. What tools are effective and which ones are not? The best way of getting that knowledge is to take courses or training from reputable sources like the Alzheimer's Society. This agency has a wealth of information and support groups which can help the caregiver focus on relevant issues. The ability for a novice caregiver to learn about the many behavioral support techniques is invaluable. I availed myself of those resources many times, and it just helped me along the way. Another thing one needs to do is become familiar with the Long-Term Care Act, specifically the Residents' Bill of Rights, and collaborate with the administration and family council at the given home. You also need to establish a rapport with all staff and members of the leadership team. If you appear to be properly informed, you will get a much better hearing when you raise an issue. The leadership teams may be different depending upon the type of residence, being for profit or not for profit, but the principles remain the same. The essential caregiver must become familiar with the staff allotted to a given area. Familiarity with staff is critical, not only to assist with your loved one, but to challenge methodology when needed. Don't be afraid to contact the administrator, the director of care, the social worker, the person-centered care team leader, or any staff member who is responsible for operations or care. Any criticisms you give must be informed, fair, and respectful. Just because we have a perspective does not preclude the possibility we could be wrong, underinformed, or misinformed. If information is provided which demonstrates strong support for a contrary view, acknowledge your misunderstanding. A case in point, having a strong view that staffing is wholly inadequate might be successfully explained by the administration with the observation that resources from the provincial government are competed for by several agencies, including hospitals, pandemic oversight committees, vaccination programs, and long-term care homes. There are many fingers in the same pie. If things are out of the control of the agency delivering that care, acknowledge that and move on. Maybe lobbying government is a better choice at that point. We need to inform ourselves about the limitations placed upon long-term care homes and advocate at higher levels for such things. A further case in point, as I understand it, the government of Ontario provides a food allowance of $9.54 per day for each resident at a long-term care home. Considering that this amount is to provide 3 meals per day, snacks, beverages, supplements, thickeners for texture-modified diets, calcium and vitamin D supplements, I am really blown away by the quality of meals they actually get provided. If there's an issue about the quality or quantity of food, which I personally do not believe there is at Sheridan Villa, the long-term care home cannot be blamed for such an inadequacy. Lobbying or criticizing the long-term care home in such an instance is fruitless. Such lobbying should be directed to the government. Follow social media. There's a lot of good information reported in this area, as well as the identification of contact persons. However, the reader must remain diligent about determining reliability. I have found Twitter, for example, a wealth of information about the scope of issues related to long-term care. There are some highly reputable sources of information. I would recommend that you join the Family Council. On many occasions, the informed collective voice is better than the lone wolf. Family Council at a given facility should provide a scope of the issues at the long-term care home in its entirety. There's a great tendency to only highlight the negative issues. However, I can assure you that you will gain a great deal of credibility, respect, and trust if you also reward the facility and staff with identification of all the positives you see. We need to remember most staff work long hours and are subjected to all forms of behavior. Your recognition of these things will promote greater assistance and cooperation. In closing, the old medical model puts efficiencies of the clinical staff before the well-being of those suffering from dementia. The essential caregiver can help manage and change that care, but many possibilities for now would not work because of COVID-19 and the associated isolation. Incorporating children, for example, engaging young adult volunteers, and virtual reality are just a few of the considerations for the future. I really believe we are the key to maintaining good care, but we need to be diligent in our information gathering and in how we deliver our support. Thank you for your attention.
Were we just going to read the questions from the side, or was someone going to moderate? Were you going to moderate, Kathleen?
I am happy to moderate. So
Okay.
thank you so much to both of you for your presentations. My first question is for Mary. You mentioned the butterfly model. Some of the participants wanted to know a little bit more about what is specific about this model. So what does it entail when it comes to implementing within the home?
So the model is, it usually takes me over an hour to explain the actual model, but I can tell you that there are 5 main focuses of work, and it's an absolute epic piece of work. There's a lot to it. So there is training of staff, which happens over a period of 8 to 10 months. There are environmental changes to the home. And you can do as much or as little as you want, depending on what your home already looks like and what you need. There is filling the home with things that are important to the people who live there. So that's getting to know them, and not only having common things like baby dolls, things like that, but also really knowing what they did for a living and having those things in the home. For example, we had a guy who was a physicist, and we brought in all of his books and a desk, and he used to work at it every day. So it's not just having people do more general things, is really focused and targeting. It's about research. So you are ethically obligated to contribute to the research around dementia care. And then there's advocacy, and that's why Gerry and I are here. So that's another big part of that work, because we don't want it just to be an island of excellence in the Region of Peel or at Jarlette. We want everybody to have access to this. And that's what we've done over this period of time. And then there's an additional one, and I've pulled it out from the others because it is much more complicated, is family mealtime, which is a lot more complicated than one would think. And worldwide, that's the one that's the most challenging. So it gets its own bucket. So those are the buckets of work associated with the model. And the philosophy behind the model is to create friendships and relationships between the people who live there and the people who work there. And they're mutually beneficial, which is what we saw from some of our outcome indicators. I'm sorry, that's really high level and fast, but you can call me and email me anytime, and I'd be happy to give you your own personal session.
And I know that, so Gerry mentioned Moira Welch's book. There is a chapter specifically dedicated to the Meaningful Care Matters or Butterfly Home approach, and a little bit about when it was implemented within the home. So if you want to learn more about the process that went into it and the impact it had on residents, and a little bit more about what was involved, that's a really good place to go. So it's, I will put the name in the chat of Moira Welch's book. It's, I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but it's a great place because I know there's an entire chapter dedicated to specifically working with the team and seeing what all went into. So where did the funding come from for the butterfly home model being implemented in Peel?
So the butterfly for Peel, it came from regional council. So regional council approved. So, you know, in municipal homes, we not only get the money from the provincial government, we also get it from the taxpayer in the Region of Peel. Now that's not accessible to everybody else. So I've seen homes that are charitable get it from their foundation. They've had fundraisers, for-profit homes, and I'm talking about the for-profit homes that are owned by families like Jarlette or Omni Healthcare or Primacare, where those homes put $7 to $10 of profit, or $7 to $8 out of every 10 of their profit back into the home. I can't speak for the for-profit or people that are traded on the stock exchange, or have, I forget what they call them. You know what? I can't speak for them, but that's where the funding comes from. But I want to say that there are things that people can do that cost you absolutely nothing to start a butterfly home. Having friendships between people who work there and live there, it doesn't cost you a thing. Sitting down and having a cup of coffee with somebody doesn't cost you a thing. What those things require is the home to pull back and be less regulated about those types of things that have always been deemed professional, right? You need to back off on that a bit more and support people to be more like friends in the home. So there's lots of things you can do that actually don't cost you very much or anything.
And some of that exists within homes. I used to work in recreation, and that was my job, was to form relationships. I had that luxury, but others on staff, you know, because of the job descriptions and time, did not. But it really does not take very much to make something a little bit more social. And you think about, like, when you're providing care to a baby, you'll talk, it's social, you don't rush through it. So why don't we think about that as people get older? So this is for both you or for Gerry. So what exactly can family councils do to convince homes, specifically for-profit homes, to implement and not put money out for implementing the butterfly home approach?
Do you want to try that, Gerry, or do you want me to do it?
You go ahead, and I might add something at the end of it.
So what I have found is some of the most pressure has actually been applied to homes by family council. One of the things that we do through advocacy is not just encourage people to adopt a model of care. One of the things we do is ask consumers to ask homes, no, we don't accept this. This is not good enough. So that's what you have to do, and you have to keep driving, and you have to be very, very vocal about it. I would have it on the agenda at every single meeting. I would start to create a plan about how you're going to implement it and go to the home and push about where are we going to find the resources, whatever that is, or connecting with, if you want to do the butterfly model, Meaningful Care Matters, because he offers a bespoke package. You can have one tiny little thing, or you can have the full Monty, right? It depends on what it is that you want. But I would encourage, because I don't think, and I've been on leadership teams in long-term care for a while, that families appreciate how much power you have when you speak up. So don't think it goes unnoticed. You just have to push, push, push. You need that evangelist. Who is it?
I would
Did you want to add something, Gerry?
Yeah, I would add to that family council has to be relevant to the situation. And why I say that is I think that sometimes membership on family council tends to not see the forest for the trees. They go after things like diet, the food that's served, or they go after things that are, in my opinion, not that food isn't important, but in my opinion, are less important than the structure of the butterfly model and how it's carried out. And so I think that family council can be extremely effective, but it all depends on who the component people are in that council, how effective it'll be. And that's why you need strong leadership. You need to have terms of reference that you stick to rigidly. And you need a strong person to lead that, because they got to keep people on track, and that's not always easily done.
Thank you, Gerry. Well put. So speaking about the role that staff plays, there's a question about what's being done to work with future professionals entering into the sector to help them become aware of different approaches to care and emotion-focused care and models like the butterfly approach.
So I've done a bit of work with the Ministry of Long-Term Care over the last year on different committees. And one of the ones that I looked at was understaffing. and they are actually actively connecting with post-secondary institutions. And it actually been spoken about high schools. I don't know if people are as old as me and remember in the days when you could become a PSW through some of the high school courses. But I'm old, you might not, that might not have been in your day. But so they're looking at even high school options and lots of funding, and looking at, say, if you work in dietary and you aspire to be a PSW or an RPN or a nurse, supporting that financially. But they are looking very heavily at the curriculum about how we care for people. This is changing, and there's going to be, fortunately for us, it's an election year, and there's an election in June, and I think they're pretty tuned in. Seniors vote, right? They're the ones that are getting out and voting. So I think we're going to see some big changes in all of these areas. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I can speak to this too. I used to teach in a college, and it was people who were getting into recreation, but this was actually a topic I would speak on, which is why I'm so excited to hear about all these presenters, because I've read about it, but I haven't met the people. But there are other programs where there are instructors that try to bring in, so a guest speaker, or, just sharing and highlighting differences. It's part of the curriculum that they're trying to include, especially those who are a bit more progressive. Gerry, sorry. You talked about the role of social media in kind of getting involved in advocacy and finding information to support you in advocacy. So how can you tell someone sharing information it's valid and credible versus getting through the extra noise that's out there right now?
Well, I think one of the techniques you have to use is, especially when it comes to scientific things that people may be talking about, there is so much anecdotal information out there that is absolutely absurd, that when you dig into it, you realize there's absolutely no reference material to base that information on. So you have to be careful that when you read something that is technical, and somebody is giving an anecdotal story about it, either positive or negatively, you have to go to the sources below that and make sure that the source is reputable. You also see people on Twitter, for example, that are on it a lot and are speaking from a professional point of view. Being, what I mean by that is, let's say, doctors who have a specialty in healthcare, specifically dementia. Those are people to follow, and they usually have all kinds of information that will help you to elaborate and understand various issues. So it's a question of digging in a little bit and watching the frequency within which you see people putting out tweets, and being careful what you adopt and don't adopt. It's not an easy task. I was a little reluctant to speak about Twitter because I know it has it's a double-edged sword, but I tell you that it's helped me. But I also tried to discern very quickly who is wrong and who is right, or what is fact-based and what isn't. So I think you have to be discerning when it comes to that kind of thing, but it's helpful.
Thank you. And Mary, before we wrap up, someone wants to know the name of your book that you mentioned earlier, or the art exhibit.
Oh, the art exhibit. So it's at PAMA, P-A-M-A, which stands for the Peel Art and Museum Association, I think, or I'm just making that up, but it's under PAMA, and it's called Life is Beautiful.
Wonderful. All right. And Kathy, are you still there?
Can I say one thing, Kathleen? Sure. I just noticed somebody has written here, William, that something about COVID has drained the budgets, and so long-term care doesn't have the funding for this. So in my discussions with the ministry, they are well aware that in that period of time we had, and I know that they did a study in Britain that supported this, significantly 80% more people die, seniors, during the pandemic of loneliness and isolation as did of COVID. So is it worse to die of COVID than to die of loneliness? So I know that they're looking at that. And what I'm actually praying for, and I think this is what's going to happen, is that there's going to be funding attached to the implementation of these person-centered models of care that they're going to put out there. Otherwise, why do it if there's no funding attached? So it should be a budget line separate from things like COVID for a home, because it's just as important. People can die of that too. And if you read the Toronto Star today, Moira Welsh has an article on this exact thing about loneliness. So sorry, thank you, Kathleen.
No problem. And not to plug Family Council Ontario's resources, but I was very lucky. I was involved in a CIHR knowledge synthesis study where we've had 2 articles published in journals. One was on a scoping review of social connectedness within long-term care. We actually work with Behavioral Supports Ontario and looked at what was being implemented during COVID as some alternatives to promote social connectedness. So there's 2 articles that we have available as resources for families to read to try and support you in advocating for the importance of social connectedness. And I'm going to hand it over to Kathy to wrap things up before we say goodbye for today.
Okay, thanks, Kathleen. I do want to just add one thing. I always have to have one thing to add. In terms of your question, to me, one of the most powerful information tools we have is looking at the homes that have shown these benefits, because this is real life evidence. So to me, if we can get more people to know what those benefits are and that these have actually happened in the existing homes, then I think that will go a long way to proving the case that the emotion-based care is the way to go. So that's my last 2 cents. So I would like to thank everybody for joining us today and thank Family Councils for co-hosting and organizing and doing so much of the work for us. We really appreciate that. It's great to work with you. And thank you so much to Gerry and Mary, 2 obvious champions for our cause, what we've been working for years, and we will get there. There's no question. So can't thank you enough. Clearly from all the comments, they found both your presentations informative and helpful and grounded. So thank you very, very much. And we'll look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Again, the comments are overwhelmingly thank you. This is what people needed. Excellent presentation. So thank you both Mary and Gerry and CARP for working with Family Council Ontario for this amazing informative webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely afternoon.
You too.
Have some haggis tonight.